most dangerous killers are not always the ones who look frightening. Sometimes they're the ones who blend into everyday life so perfectly that no one suspects the darkness hiding beneath the surface. Friends greet them. Neighbors trust them. Families welcome them into their homes. Then one day, the horrifying truth emerges, revealing that the person everyone thought they knew had been living a deadly double life all along. This is the chilling story of Wayne Nance, the man known as the Missoula Mauler. Wayne Nathan Nance was born on October 18, 1955, and grew up in Montana. By most accounts, he appeared to be an ordinary man. He worked various jobs, including construction and furniture moving, and people who met him often described him as friendly, polite, and helpful. There was little about his outward appearance to suggest that investigators would one day consider him one of Montana's most notorious suspected serial killers. Behind that ordinary exterior, however, authorities believe Nance was driven by violent fantasies that escalated into brutal crimes. His attacks were often marked by burglary, sexual violence, and murder, with investigators believing he carefully selected victims who had little reason to suspect they were in danger. One of the most significant cases linked to Nance involved Doug and Crease Wells, a young married couple from Missoula. In September 1986, the couple suddenly disappeared after spending time at home. Months later, their bodies were discovered in a remote area outside the city. Both had been murdered. Investigators quickly developed Wayne Nance as a suspect because he had previously worked for the couple as a furniture mover and had been inside their home. Despite their suspicions, there was not enough evidence at the time to bring criminal charges. Only days after the Wells disappeared, Wayne Nance carried out what would become his final attack. Late at night, he broke into the home of Crease and Janet Davies while they slept. Armed and intent on controlling the couple, Nance tied them up before launching a violent assault. What happened next changed everything. Although seriously injured and restrained, Crease Davies managed to free himself. Refusing to surrender, he fought back with extraordinary determination. A desperate struggle broke out inside the house, ending in a gunfight. During the confrontation, Wayne Nance was mortally wounded. Police responding to the scene found Nance dead inside the home. Remarkably, both Crease and Janet Davies survived the terrifying ordeal despite suffering severe injuries. Nance's death ended his reign of violence, but it also opened the door to a much larger investigation. Detectives began re-examining unsolved murders and disappearances throughout western Montana. Witnesses came forward with accounts of suspicious behavior, while investigators searched for physical evidence that could connect Nance to other crimes. Years later, advances in DNA technology confirmed what many detectives had long believed. Forensic evidence linked Wayne Nance to the murders of Doug and Crease Wells, finally providing answers in one of Montana's most haunting homicide cases. Authorities also examined his possible involvement in several other unsolved murders. While investigators have long suspected he claimed additional victims, many of those cases have never been conclusively solved, leaving the true extent of his crimes uncertain. Because Wayne Nance died before he could be questioned or stand trial, many questions remain unanswered. Any secrets he carried about other possible victims died with him, leaving grieving families without the closure they had hoped to find. The story of Wayne Nance is a disturbing reminder that appearances can be dangerously deceptive. A man who seemed ordinary to those around him is now remembered as one of Montana's most infamous suspected serial killers. His confirmed crimes left lives shattered, while the unanswered questions surrounding his possible victims continue to haunt investigators decades later. Some murder investigations remain unsolved for years, leaving detectives with nothing but scattered evidence, unanswered questions, and grieving families desperate for justice. Then, decades later, a single breakthrough changes everything. In one extraordinary case, modern DNA technology exposed a man who had quietly lived among his neighbors while allegedly committing crimes that stretched across generations. By the time investigators uncovered the truth, many of his victims had waited more than 30 years for answers. This is the story of John Floyd Thomas Jr. 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙗 Jr., was born on January 26, 1936, in Alabama before eventually settling in Los Angeles, California. To those who knew him, he appeared to be an ordinary resident living a relatively quiet life. He worked various jobs over the years and rarely attracted the kind of attention that would place him under serious suspicion. But according to investigators, Thomas had been hiding a violent pattern of crime for decades. Beginning in the 1970s, Los Angeles experienced a series of brutal attacks targeting elderly women. Many of the victims lived alone and were attacked inside the safety of their own homes. Detectives noticed disturbing similarities between the crimes. Victims were sexually assaulted. Their homes were often ransacked to make the attacks appear like burglaries, and many were strangled to death. Because of the age of the victims and the neighborhoods where the attacks occurred, investigators eventually referred to the unknown offender as the West Side Rapist. At the time, however, forensic technology was far less advanced than it is today, making it nearly impossible to identify the man responsible. As the years passed, the attacks appeared to stop. Cases grew cold, evidence was archived, and many feared the killer would never be identified. Everything changed decades later. In the early 2000s, detectives reopened several unsolved cases and submitted preserved biological evidence for modern DNA testing. The results pointed investigators toward 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙗 Jr. Surveillance teams secretly collected a discarded item containing his DNA, and laboratory testing confirmed a match with evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes. In 2009, after years of living unnoticed, Thomas was arrested at the age of 72. Prosecutors charged him with multiple murders connected to elderly women killed during the 1970s and 1980s. Investigators also linked him to numerous sexual assaults committed during the same period. They believe he deliberately chose older women because they were more vulnerable and often lived alone, making them easier targets. During his trial, prosecutors presented DNA evidence along with witness testimony and investigative findings built over decades. The scientific evidence became the foundation of the case, demonstrating how advances in forensic technology could solve crimes that once seemed impossible to crack. In 2013, 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙗 Jr. was convicted of several murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Many investigators believe his confirmed convictions represent only a portion of his crimes. Over the years, authorities have examined additional unsolved murders that share similar characteristics, but not every case has been conclusively linked to him. As a result, the full extent of his violence may never be known. 𝙤𝙤𝙧𝙗 Jr.'s case stands as one of the clearest examples of how justice can arrive decades after a crime is committed. Although many victims never lived to see their attacker brought to court, advances in DNA technology finally exposed a man who investigators say spent years hiding behind the appearance of an ordinary life. His arrest brought long-awaited answers to families and marked the end of one of Los Angeles' longest-running unsolved serial crime investigations. If you enjoyed this episode of Dark Minds, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Episode 10 is coming next, where we'll uncover another true crime case that proves the darkest minds often hide in the most ordinary places. Thank you for watching.